She kept the old phone in the kitchen drawer, wrapped in a dish towel like something that could bruise. 9 years had turned it into a small, sleeping animal, swollen battery, hairline crack, a film of dust under the glass that never wiped fully clean. When she plugged it in every few months, the same blue icon glowed in the corner, one unheard voicemail, and she would stare at the number as if it were counting her, not the message. Everyone told her grief softens. Hers learned how to sit still. It didn't talk. It waited. The last time they'd spoken, the day before. They'd argued about nothing that matters in an obituary, a late reply, a forgotten errand, the tone of a text that had no tone. He'd called the next morning. She'd missed it by minutes. She'd saved the things she could save, the proof of his voice unopened. She said she was protecting her memory. The truth was simpler. If she never pressed play, the message could be anything. Hope lives best behind glass. The email arrived on a Wednesday she had set aside for other pains. Laundry, bills, the dull weight of an ordinary afternoon. We're retiring our legacy voicemail service in 30 days. Words like migrate, export, permanently deleted stacked themselves into a deadline. She reread the message until the letters blurred. There it was at last. Not a sign, exactly, but a clock. If she did nothing, the voice she refused to hear would vanish. If she did something, she might discover it wasn't what she needed it to be. Some people fear monsters. She feared mundane. Milk, a joke half told. The background blinker of his car at a red light. She feared that the last thing he left her was proof of an ordinary morning, and that her sorrow had been wearing a crown it didn't earn. That night, she took the towel-wrapped phone to the table and set it down like a guest. The charger was taped in 2 places, copper bright, where the wire showed through. When the screen awoke, it pulled her face into a dull reflection. For a second, she almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. Older around the mouth, careful around the eyes. The blue icon blinked once. She tapped voicemail and felt her hands go cold. The screen offered her 3 choices she wished were simpler. Play, save, delete. She'd lived 9 years between the first and the last. She thought of calling his brother to ask whether she should listen. But the question itself felt like betrayal. The message had been to her. It arrived in a morning that would later become unbearable. A morning that still smelled to her like damp bread and bus exhaust. Maybe he'd said her name. Maybe he hadn't said anything at all, just breathed and held a space where a sentence should have been. She set the phone face down and made tea she didn't drink. She turned on the radio and turned it off, because every song was almost theirs. When the kettle cooled to silence, she turned the phone over again. Her thumb hovered above the little triangle. She tapped, not meaning to, and a soft burst of air reached her. The kind a mouth makes before it decides on a word. She stopped it so fast, she wasn't sure whether she'd heard anything at all. The room swallowed the sound. The blue icon didn't care either way. It simply waited with her, counting down a month she hadn't asked for. The carrier's email became a ritual. She read it in lines at the pharmacy, in the elevator, in bed with the light off, as if frequency could turn pressure into calm. 30 days, then 28, then 25. The number shrank like a sweater in hot water. She tried to be practical. She visited a store where the fluorescent lights made everyone look like a bad copy of themselves. The clerk, kind in the way of people trained to be, offered to transfer the message to a USB stick shaped like a key. So it won't vanish, he said. She smiled, a practiced half thank you, and left without buying anything. The problem wasn't vanishing. The problem was proof. She could live with a ghost. She wasn't sure she could live with a recording. She found herself narrating excuses to the empty apartment. Not today. Today is heavy already. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'll be braver. She kept the old phone charged now. The cord, a quiet lifeline stretched from wall to memory. At night, that small blue dot pulsed like a lighthouse in a storm she refused to name. She moved it from the kitchen to the bedroom to the desk, and the message followed, a patient animal circling the rooms it knew. On day 22, she slid the drawer closed too quickly and pinched the towel. The phone tumbled, thudded, survived. Her heart took longer to admit the same. She began to remember the last week not as a blur, but as tempera paint separating in a jar, color and water settling into layers. The fight. The apology text she never sent because she wanted to say it out loud. The ordinary cruelty of assuming there would be time. She tried to conjure his voice and discovered she could replicate cadence, not pitch, rhythm, not tone. Memory owns the drum, not the flute. She pressed the phone to her ear once, with the volume down, as if proximity alone could teach her courage. It taught her how loud her own breathing was. On day 19, a friend asked whether she planned to keep the message at all. Maybe letting it go is letting him rest, the friend said gently. She nodded like a person who agrees in public and argues in private. She walked home by streets they used to take. Without thinking, and found herself at the corner bakery that still burnt the first tray every morning. The same woman at the counter, the same bell that rang too late after the door. She bought nothing and left, carrying the smell like a small theft. She made a decision that wasn't quite a decision. She would listen before the month ended, but not yet. The promise soothed her like a mild painkiller. That night she placed the phone on the pillow beside her and turned off the lamp. The screen dimmed to a night version of itself, showed the icon as a softer glow. She closed her eyes and tried to hear without hearing. Sometime after 2, the phone buzzed with a storage full warning, a mechanical mercy that forced her to touch it. She deleted old photos of dish racks and road signs, the lives of days that hadn't mattered, and left the ones that did. When she returned to the voicemail screen, her thumb found the triangle again, as if it belonged there. She took a breath, timed to courage, and pressed. A click, an inhale, a small scrape like the edge of a seatbelt. She froze. Somewhere in that half second, a syllable assembled itself. She pulled her hand away as if the phone had heat. The room went still. The month went on, and the sound, whatever it was, tucked itself back into silence, waiting for a braver morning than this one. By day 12, the silence had texture. It filled corners, clung to the curtains, lingered in the click of switches. She started timing her days around the phone, pretending she didn't. Breakfast beside it, keys beside it, hand brushing it on the way out like superstition. The countdown email appeared again. Final reminder. She hated how final sounded. Softer than reminder. That night she poured a glass of wine and sat on the floor with the phone between her knees. The screen still carried her reflection, faint and reversed. "You're ridiculous," she told it. "It's just a message." But the tremor in her throat made it sound like confession. She pressed play again. A crackle. Then his voice unmistakably him, closer than breath, saying one single word. Not her name. Just hey. The sound was so alive it made the world hesitate. Then the recording cut to a long pause. A distant noise, maybe traffic, maybe wind. She held her breath, waiting for the next sentence. Nothing came. She tapped pause, heart hammering. She'd heard him for the first time in 9 years. Somehow it wasn't enough. She rewound, listened again. Hey, that was it. One syllable. A doorway that led nowhere. It could mean I'm sorry. It could mean I'm home. It could mean I didn't know this would be the last call. She stared at the timer on the screen. 10 seconds total. Only 2 of them sound. The rest, a vacuum that held more than words could. Her chest felt hollow and crowded at once. She whispered his name, the way people talk to photographs. Then, impulsively, she pressed play again, letting the small pause unfold to its end. At the final second, something faint, a breath maybe, and then a click. The message ended. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because her body didn't know what else to do. It was absurd, this tiny thing she had feared for almost a decade. 2 seconds of a voice, and yet it rearranged the air in her lungs. She went to bed with the phone on her nightstand, volume muted, screen dark. For the first time in years, she dreamed in sound instead of images, his voice saying hey, repeating until it no longer hurt. When she woke, the ache was still there, but smaller, shaped differently. The next morning, she replayed the message again, this time with headphones. As if proximity might reveal meaning the speaker had hidden, she listened for the background, the hum, the static, the space between syllables. There was a second. Sound she hadn't noticed before. A rhythm, uneven but steady. Knuckles on a steering wheel, a turn signal. Maybe his heartbeat pressed too close to the microphone. She slowed the playback, absurdly like a detective trying to solve love. The small distortions turned human again. The inhale before the word was long, deliberate. The pause after longer still. Shape of what might have been speech, then nothing. The message had no goodbye. She realized that for 9 years she had been guarding not his last words, but the silence that followed them, and that silence had changed shape to fit her. Around noon, she walked to the river, their river, the one where they used to throw flat stones and count skips. The city had built new railings since then, shinier, less forgiving. She leaned against the metal and took out her earbuds. Sound of water hitting stone filled the space the voicemail had left. She thought about deleting it, freeing the little machine from carrying the weight of memory. But the thought of erasing that single hey felt like closing a door on a room still breathing. She decided to keep it, but not as a wound, maybe as proof. Back home, she renamed the file, changed voicemail 0917 to hey. Just that. She copied it to the new phone, to a folder called important, knowing someday she'd forget why. That night, she played it one last time before bed. The sound no longer hurt the way it used to. It was smaller, yes, but also clearer. Not a goodbye, not even a hello. Just a voice caught between both, surviving long enough for her to understand that sometimes the last thing someone leaves you isn't a message. It's an unfinished sentence you learn to stop finishing. She turned off the light and let the quiet return, softer now, like the exhale that finally follows a held breath. In the days after renaming the file, she noticed how the world was full of beginnings that never learned their endings. The kettle cut off before the boil, the elevator doors hesitated and then closed on a sentence between neighbors. A cloud formed and failed to rain. She started collecting them the way people collect smooth stones, small proofs that not finishing is also a way to exist.
She kept
The old phone on the kitchen counter like a companion, and once each morning pressed play with the volume low. Hey, pause! The click at the end. She didn't brace for it anymore. She let it arrive and leave. The way a breeze touches a curtain, she began to talk back. Not into the phone, not into any recorder, just into the room that had held both of them once. She said the things they hadn't said on that last ordinary week. I bought the good coffee. I'm sorry about the tone. I saved the stupid show for us. The talk wasn't dramatic. It was domestic, the language they had always lived in. In speaking, she felt herself loosen from the myth of last words. There are always more, if you're willing to say them alone, on a Sunday. She took the train to the neighborhood where they'd first lived. She wanted to see if the laundromat still chewed socks, and if the corner store still sold the peach candies he used to pretend not to like. The laundromat had become a pet spa. The store had a new owner and the same bell. She stood in front of the candy shelf and touched the plastic bag with 2 fingers, as if taking it would disturb a sleeping animal. She didn't buy it. The not buying felt like a kind of honesty. Back home, she opened a drawer she hadn't opened in years and found the cardboard shoebox labeled in her own hand, receipts under a drift of taxi stubs and warranty. Cards lay a square of dark plastic. She'd forgotten his old microcassette recorder from the year before everything ended. He used to talk into it when he drove. A private workshop for words he didn't want to lose. The batteries had corroded into white salt. She cleaned them with a cotton swab and hope, rummaged until she found 2 new AAs, and slid them in. The machine woke with a red eye. She pressed play and heard the hiss of old tape, then his voice younger by a season. He said the date, his version of order, and then fragments. A grocery list, a reminder to call the dentist. It's an idea for a joke that never learned to be funny. She smiled despite herself, the way you smile at a photograph of someone blinking. She let the tape run until he said her name, not hey, her name whole. He paused, as if waiting for permission from a future that hadn't happened. You were right, he said softly. I get scared and I hide in small things. I'm going to fix it. Swear. Tomorrow I'll. The tape popped and clicked and rolled into static. The cassette having reached a stretch it couldn't cross. She stopped the machine, heart pounding. Tomorrow? He had said tomorrow with his mouth sure. She rewound, pressed play again, and the same promise arrived and tore itself on the same snag of oxide in time. The word tomorrow became a room she could stand in, but not move through. That night she lay awake with both devices on the pillow beside her. The old phone with its 1 blue dot. The recorder with its red eye, 2 small lanterns from different years. She didn't press anything. She stared at the ceiling and let the unfinished sentences keep her company. There was a shape to them now. Her hey and his tomorrow. 2 ends of a bridge that had never met. When the first gray of morning thinned, the dark, she sat up and whispered, as if telling a secret to the air, okay, one more try? The room listened, as rooms do. The phone waited. The tape waited. She reached for neither. She got up, opened the window. Let the cold in first. She needed proof that the day had been heavier than an accident and lighter than fate. Proof that the voice had approached her on purpose. So she did something silly and exacting. She called his old number. It belonged to a restaurant now. A recorded voice listed today's specials. She listened to the menu all the way through, and at the beep for leaving a reservation, she said nothing and hung up. The line had survived his leaving by becoming useful to strangers. There was comfort in that. Numbers move on. On her computer, she opened an email account she hadn't used since before the argument. The inbox was a museum of small, urgent things that never mattered. Sales, reminders, weather warnings for storms that had already passed. In the sent folder, an unsent draft blinked at her with the shy arrogance of something that had waited to be found. She clicked it. It was to him. It said, simply, "Can we talk tonight? I don't want to be right. I want us to be okay." She stared until the words blurred, then hit save again, as if editing the past into kindness might count for something. She typed his brother's name into the search bar and found an email thread from the week after. She had written, "Do you know what happened that morning?" He had answered, "He left early. Said he needed to pick something up and then call you from the car." There was a photo attached she'd never opened. A receipt time-stamped 8:03 a.m. from the little record store that used to smell like cardboard and rain. The item, voice recorder, microcassette, 60-minute. She touched the screen, the way people do when what they want to hold isn't there. She went to the closet, pulled the shoebox back down, and dug through until she found a second tape with a handwritten label that wasn't his. The scrawl was hers. Trip. Groceries spare. She didn't remember writing it. The cassette looked identical to the first, except for a faint notch on the edge where plastic meets air. She slid it into the recorder and pressed play. Shh. Then her own voice from a forgotten afternoon testing the machine. Is this thing even working? A laugh. His laugh answering. The sound of the two of them layered over a kitchen full of pans. She let it run until the tape clicked off. Ordinary life, held on a spine of magnet and chance. The search for proof had stopped being about the last message. It had widened into a net, catching small facts that could hold the weight of regret without tearing. He had been on his way to call. He had bought the thing that made calling easier for him. He had said tomorrow into a private mouth and meant it. Evening leaned against the windows. She poured tea and stood in the doorway between kitchen and hall, a border she had crossed 10,000 times without noticing. On the counter, the old phone slept. In her pocket, the new phone buzzed, a calendar alert she'd forgotten to cancel. Legacy voicemail service ends in 3 days. She put the cup down. The alert kept vibrating until it stopped, a tiny imitation of a missed call. She took out the old phone, thumb on the triangle, before she could talk herself away. The word arrived again, familiar now. Hey, pause. In the pocket of the pause. With the same softness people use to check on a sleeping child, she whispered into the room, I'm here. The message ended where it always ended, but the quiet after didn't. It held. And for the first time, the space inside that silence felt less like absence and more like a place being set. She didn't count the days the way the email did. The company's reminder said 3 remaining, but she measured time differently now, by the distance between heartbeats that refused to even out. The phone slept on the counter, charger looped like a tether. Each time she passed it, she told herself, not yet, not while the light looks like this. She waited for a kind of bravery that never arrives all at once. On the first of the 3 days, she walked to the river again, where frost had begun to lace the edges of stones. She held the phone in her coat pocket, thumb pressed against its shape through the fabric. For months after his accident, she hadn't been able to stand that river's sound. Now she found herself leaning into it, hearing its roughness as company. The voicemail existed because of water. She realized he'd been driving in the rain that morning, windshield wipers marking time. The soft scrape in the recording could have been that, or the sound of him deciding what to say next. When she came home, she set the phone on the kitchen table and, for the first time, didn't turn it face down. She let it stare at her while she cooked pasta she wouldn't eat. Steam clouded the screen. A drop of condensation slid down like a second-hand marking time. Somewhere in the apartment, a pipe clicked. The room seemed to wait for her next move. That night, she dreamed she was sitting in a car, passenger seat, watching his hand reach for the dial to call her. In the dream, she knew she could stop him, or change something, but every motion she made was slow, underwater. The phone rang once, then twice, and she woke up before the third. The taste of metal filled her mouth. The real phone glowed in the dark, a single blue dot in a small world. Day 2 came cold and sharp. She answered no calls, ignored the doorbell, listened again to the voicemail, the tape, then the voicemail again, as if layering the sounds might build a bridge back to what he'd meant to say. Each time she pressed play, she heard more space than sound, more ache than speech. But it felt alive. The silence inside the recording was breathing with her. She began to wonder if the message was unfinished because she was supposed to finish it, that maybe grief wasn't meant to be solved, but continued spoken into. On a scrap of paper she wrote, Hey, tomorrow, I'm here. 3 words, 3 fragments. She placed the paper beside the phone and turned off the kitchen light. The darkness accepted the bargain without comment. The morning of the deadline arrived quietly. The air had that stillness cities forget how to keep. She woke before the alarm, half dreaming, half knowing, and reached for the phone before her eyes had learned the light. The battery was full, the signal strong, as if it too was preparing for something final. The email from the company sat unread at the top of her inbox. Your voicemail service will discontinue today at midnight. She could have transferred it, saved it again, kept it in new forms forever, but what she had feared most had already changed shape. It wasn't the loss of his voice anymore. It was the loss of what she'd built around it. She made coffee, left the mug untouched, opened the window, and let winter breathe through the room. The river's hum carried faintly through the distance. On the table, the phone blinked once, a soft, almost polite reminder that time moves even when no one asks it to. She pressed play. Hey, pause. Pause. Then, something she hadn't noticed before, buried beneath the static, a breath half covered by a laugh, and the faintest trace of music or radio in the background, playing the first note of a song she hadn't thought about in years. It was their song, or close enough that her mind completed it. The sound broke, skipped, and the message ended mid-note. The blue icon vanished as the screen dimmed, replaced by a single notification. Voicemail deleted after playback. She stared at the screen, waiting for panic. It didn't come. Only a calm she didn't trust yet. She took the paper with the 3 words, "Hey, tomorrow, I'm here," and folded it once, then again, until it fit inside the palm of her hand. She didn't need to keep it. She just wanted to feel its weight. She stepped outside, shoes crunching against frost, the air silver with cold. The river sounded louder today, not angry, just alive. At the bridge, she let the paper go. It didn't drift away quickly. It floated for a while, spinning, deciding which way to face. The current finally took it. She stayed until it disappeared beneath the ice. When she turned back toward home, her pocket was light. The phone no longer carried him, but somehow the silence that followed did. She woke with the smell of winter on her coat, and the sound of the river still murmuring somewhere behind her ribs. The apartment felt different, lighter, but not empty. She made coffee and didn't flinch when the kettle hissed. The phone sat silent on the counter, blank now, its memory wiped clean by the system that had promised to protect it. She expected grief to come running back, demanding attention. It didn't. It lingered politely at the edges of the room, waiting to see if she'd invite it in. The days began to stretch wider. She walked without purpose, bought things she didn't need. Spoke to strangers in line at the store just to hear herself use her voice, small human sounds replacing static. She caught herself humming once a few wandering notes, off-key, but certain, and stopped, embarrassed. Before realizing no one else was there to hear, in the afternoon, she took the old cassette recorder to a repair shop. The man behind the counter, gray-bearded and curious, held it like an injured bird. "These still work," he said. "You just have to let the tape breathe." He opened the casing, cleaned the rollers, rewound the reel until the red leader showed. When she pressed play, the hiss returned, and then her younger voice saying, "Is this thing even working?" Followed by his laugh again, brighter now, like the sound had learned to live without apology. The man smiled. "Whoever that is," he said. "Sounds like someone who knew how to make a room feel warm." She nodded, unable to answer. She thanked him, left the shop, and sat on a nearby bench. The air smelled of diesel and oranges from a vendor's cart. She held the recorder in both hands and listened once more, the tiny machine buzzing softly. The tape ran to the end, clicked, and began to rewind on its own, looping itself back to the start. She thought about the way memory does the same thing, not to torture you, but to remind you that it's still moving. Each rewind leaves a faint scar on the tape, proof of repetition, of trying again. She pressed stop and looked at her reflection in the recorder's silver side panel. Her face was no longer the same one that had hidden from a blue icon for 9 years. It had different weather now. On the walk home, she passed a man playing a violin in the subway. The song wasn't familiar, but something in its shape carried the same rhythm as the voicemail. Breath, pause, note, silence. She stood listening until the train arrived and took the sound away. That night, for the first time in years, she left both devices unplugged. The silence that followed was not absence. It was space. The kind of space rooms get when someone finally opens a window after a long winter. She began noticing details she'd ignored for years, the way morning light found a hidden mirror in the hallway, the creak in the floor that sounded like a door whispering wait. She spent one afternoon cleaning drawers, not out of grief, but curiosity. The towel that had once wrapped the phone was still there, soft from age. She folded it neatly and placed it in the laundry basket, a small ceremony without an audience. Beneath it, she found a postcard he'd never mailed, a picture of the sea, blank on the back. She held it up to the light and imagined what he might have written. Maybe nothing at all. Maybe that was enough. By evening, the apartment looked the same, but felt different. The air had corners again. She brewed tea, opened the balcony door, and stood outside. The city hummed beneath her, not demanding, just alive. She wondered how many stories were being left half-told at this very moment. Voicemails unheard, letters unsent, words paused midair. It comforted her to know the world was full of unfinished things. She picked up the recorder from the table and pressed record for the first time. The red light blinked, steady and brave. She didn't prepare a speech. She just spoke. "Hey," she said quietly. "You were right. Tomorrow came. I'm here." The recorder word, catching every breath, every hesitation, the sound of a window closing behind her. When she stopped the tape, she didn't rewind it. She labeled it in pencil. For later, inside, she placed it in the same drawer where the phone had once slept. Then she turned off the lights, the city glow spilling across the ceiling like quiet applause. It was strange, she thought, how letting go could sound so much like beginning again. By spring, the air had changed its tone. The city sounded awake again, impatient with itself, full of new noises. One afternoon, a knock at her door startled her. Real knocks always do. It was his brother, the one who had answered her email all those months ago. He stood there holding a small box, the kind courier services use for things too personal to trust to machines. "I was cleaning the attic," he said. "Found this. Thought maybe it should be yours." Inside, under a fold of yellowed tissue paper, lay an envelope with her name written in his handwriting. Careful, tilted slightly to the right. The seal was broken. Time had done it for her. She didn't open it immediately. She offered coffee instead, and they sat at the table where the phone used to live. The brother's presence carried the same quiet decency his sibling once had. When he left, she waited until the apartment was completely still before sliding the letter free. The paper smelled faintly of cedar. It was short, almost abrupt. "I was heading to the store to get that tape you like, the one that doesn't hiss. If I'm late, it's because I'm thinking about what to say that won't sound like fixing. I just want to say it right. I love you when you're quiet, even when I don't understand what you're protecting. I'll call once I'm in the car." No signature. Just a drawn line, unfinished. She sat with it for a long time, tracing the ink until it blurred. The letter didn't answer anything she'd wanted to know. It didn't explain the hey, or the silence, or why he'd never gotten to the next word. But it filled a gap she hadn't known. She still guarded the proof that he had meant to return, that his voice hadn't been the end, but the middle of something interrupted. She folded the letter carefully, slid it into the same envelope, and placed it in the drawer beside the recorder labeled for later. Two unfinished messages, side by side, facing each other like open hands. That night, she dreamed again of the river. This time it was calm, smooth as a mirror, reflecting not faces but sky. She began walking more after that, not to reach anywhere, just to keep the air moving through her. Some days she carried the letter folded in her pocket like a charm. Other days she left it home, trusting it to wait. On a warm Sunday morning, a street musician was playing the same tune she'd once heard in the subway, slow, tender, almost clumsy in its honesty. She stopped, listening from across the pavement. The melody wasn't sad anymore. It was simply true. She took out her phone, the new one, and recorded 30 seconds of the sound. When she got home, she played it back, listening to the violin mix with footsteps, with laughter, with her own faint exhale. Life leaking into life. She named the file April Street. Later that evening, she went through her recordings folder. The old files, voice memos, shopping lists, reminders, all seemed trivial beside that one small sound. She hovered over delete all, then decided against it. Keeping the noise felt like respecting the machines of everything that had carried her here. Before bed, she sat by the open window. The city's pulse rose and fell. Dogs, sirens, a window slamming shut somewhere far off. She thought about how silence isn't the absence of sound, but the place where sound goes to rest. She took the cassette recorder from the drawer, pressed play, and let her own voice from weeks before fill the room. "Hey, you were right. Tomorrow came. I'm here." She didn't cry. She smiled, small, involuntary, the way people smile when they recognize themselves in a photograph they didn't expect to love. The tape ended. She left it running, listening to the soft hum of the machine until it stopped itself. The quiet that followed didn't echo anymore. It settled. Somewhere outside, a car horn sounded twice, short, uncertain, like someone rehearsing hello. By early summer, she'd stopped counting months. Healing had become less of a timeline and more of a habit. Small, steady acts that looked ordinary from the outside. She no longer flinched at sudden noises or avoided songs with his name in them. But one evening, while cleaning the drawer, she noticed something strange. The old cassette recorder was humming, faintly, even though it was switched off. She checked the batteries dead. She pressed stop out of instinct, and the sound ceased. For a moment, she wondered if it had been her imagination or a leftover current, or maybe the memory itself refusing to rest. Curiosity won. She replaced the batteries, pressed play, and waited. A hiss, then her voice again. "Hey, you were right. Tomorrow came. I'm here." Then, after a few seconds of silence, another sound she didn't remember recording. A faint echo of his laughter. Distant, soft, like it had slipped in from another tape. She froze. Played it again. The laugh was still there. She couldn't explain it. Maybe the cassette had partially overwritten an old recording, or maybe sound like love sometimes refuses to vanish completely. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, listening to it on repeat. The laugh didn't scare her. It steadied her breathing like a metronome guiding her back to rhythm. That night, she dreamed she was in their old apartment, both of them sitting at the table, cups half full, the recorder between them. He was laughing at something she couldn't hear, and she found herself laughing too, even though she didn't know why. The dream ended before it explained itself, but she woke smiling. The next morning, she carried the recorder to the park. Children were shouting, a dog chased a paper bag, and everything alive seemed slightly out of tune, beautifully so. She pressed record again and let the machine drink the noise. She didn't say anything this time. She just let the day speak for itself. When the tape clicked off, she rewound it once, labeled it June, alive, and placed it in her bag beside the others. Not as memorials, but as proof that living makes sound. A week later, she went back to the river. Not for closure, that word had lost its shape, but to see what the water had done with the paper she'd let go months before. The ice was gone. The surface shimmered, restless. Of course, there was no sign of it. Still, she stood on the bridge, the same spot, and whispered, "Thank you for carrying it." In her bag, the recorder clicked softly, an accidental bump against the play button. His laughter spilled out again, faint but alive, folding itself into the rush of water. The two sounds met and didn't cancel each other. They coexisted like memory and present tense, finally learning the same language. She stayed there until dusk, when the wind began to cool and the light turned copper. A couple walked past holding hands, arguing softly, their words blending with the river's hiss. She smiled, thinking how the world never runs out of voices, even when it feels like yours is the only one missing. When she got home, she placed the recorder on the table and left it playing, letting the small laugh and the outdoor noise fill the apartment. She didn't turn on any lights. The sound mixed with the city's rhythm, footsteps upstairs, a radio through a wall, the heartbeat hum of pipes. Everything humming in quiet agreement. Life continues. She sat down and began writing in a notebook she hadn't touched in years. Not about grief, not about love, just about ordinary things. The taste of strawberries, the way dust looked golden in late light, the song the violinist used to play. When she closed the notebook, the tape had reached its end. The recorder stopped with a small click like punctuation, and for the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel like something ending. It felt like the moment right before someone says, "Hey." Autumn arrived quietly, soft edges, long shadows. She didn't notice it at first, the shift in the light, the way the city began to breathe slower. What she did notice was how silence had changed texture again. It no longer pressed against her. It moved with her. She could cook, walk, wash dishes without feeling the old pull of absence. The drawer that once held ghosts now held folded towels. One afternoon, while cleaning the window, she found herself humming that same half-forgotten tune the street musician used to play. The sound drifted through the open glass, mingling with traffic and wind. It didn't belong to him anymore, or to her. It was simply the world continuing. On impulse, she took the recorder and pressed play. His laughter came through the static, faint but certain. She didn't close her eyes this time. She watched the trees outside bend in the wind and let the sound fill the room until it became part of the air. Then she pressed record over it, not to erase, but to join. "Hey," she said softly, the same word he'd left her 9 years before. Then she'll let the moment breathe. "It's a good day," she added, smiling. "You'd like it." She stopped the tape, labeled it September Shared, and placed it next to the others. Each cassette now carried a piece of something incomplete that had learned to stay that way. That evening, she went out for a walk. The air smelled of leaves and rain. She caught a reflection in a storefront window. Not younger, not older, just honest. The kind of face that had lived through the sound of unfinished sentences and come out quieter, steadier. For the first time, she realized she hadn't played the voicemail in weeks. She didn't need to. The voice had already moved into the way she listened to everything else. The first cold rain of October came early. She sat by the window with tea and the last cassette in the recorder. The reels spun their gentle circles, a rhythm she could have lived by. She thought about how the story of a voice could stretch across almost a decade, a single word holding all the weight of goodbye and return. She rewound the tape to the very start. His laugh, her reply, the hum of the room, the faint whisper of background air. Then she pressed play and let it run until the end, listening with her whole body, not searching this time, not decoding. When it stopped, she let the machine hum in its quiet afterglow. She didn't cry. The tears had already done their work in other seasons. What rose instead was gratitude, not for the loss, not even for the voice, but for the way time had taught her to hear differently. She walked to the balcony, the recorder still in her hand, and looked at the city washed clean by rain. Cars moved like slow lights through puddles. Someone below laughed, a sound full and alive. She tilted her head, listening. It was almost the same pitch as his laugh. Almost, but not. She smiled, whispering to no one, "It's okay." The recorder clicked off, the final tape finished. She didn't label this one. She left it blank, unwritten, a space for everything that didn't need words anymore. Back inside, she placed it on the windowsill, beside the cooling cup of tea, and watched the condensation bead and fade. The blue light from the street lamp caught her face for an instant, and in that brief reflection on the glass, her lips curved upward, small, certain, the same shape as the word that had started it all. And for the first time, the smile wasn't borrowed. It was hers.